Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, grasshoppers. Yes, we are in Toronto. Yes, it was an amazingly gripping day yesterday. It was absolutely ridiculous, to say the least, how ridiculous it was. Fabiano won a much-needed game against Pragnananda in the last minute of play, maybe the last so many minutes of play. Gukesh managed to overwhelm Alireza Firouzja. That was quite exciting. In general, I'm going to switch some things out here. Whoops, we want to go to the broadcast. We want to check out the stream. But yeah, the Pragnananda game was quite incredible. Fabiano came with it to a certain extent. Prague offered peace with bishop to b5 because you're not gonna overwhelm a player of Fabiano's strength and experience with a positional game. Many years ago, I was told, rightfully so, that basically, if you really wish to win a game against a much stronger player, then you have to actually, go after them. You must go after them. You can't expect to play the English or b3 and expect to outwit a much more experienced, seasoned player. You're going to have to take them into complications where your calculation skills prevail. And that is the case here as well. There's no doubt about it that Prague made a judgment call. Perhaps he was even advised wrongly to avoid Fabiano's theory in the main lines. But on average, I felt like he should have taken the bull by the horns and played for the advantage appropriately. It's really sad, in fact. As it turns out, Fabiano grabs the center. In fact, if you were to ask me who the stronger player is in this position, it's quite clear. One side has the two bishops, greater space in the center, and the other side has two redundant knights. These knights are both doing exactly the same thing. These two knights may be able to get some pressure on e5, but we all know how that goes. Black is going to play knight d7 and f6, and that pressure goes away. So, in reality, what did he get? He got the bishop pair back. And at the same time, Fabiano got an opportunity to harass the opponent's queen appropriately. So, things got a little dicey here for the most part, as it was probably required in this position that Prague played queen f5. Absolutely probably required. Instead, he chose to move a piece backwards, which is a sign of it's basically a sign that the opponent, you're bowing to the opponent. Anytime you move pieces backwards, you are bowing to an opponent. You're like, sorry, didn't mean to get in your space. So on average, try to move your pieces forward. This is a lesson from Judith Bolgar. She never hesitated. Already the queen is starting to feel it after the move g4. I'm not entirely positive if there was no longer a chance to play queen to f5, knight to d4, queen to g6, check, and then some unfortunately passive move like rook to a2 to guard to c2. Let's check it on the engine for the most part, but black is already better to a certain extent. So instead of rook e1, queen f5 does not appear on our radar, but queen f3 does. He has to bring the queen back into the game. And of course, black is better in this position. C'est la vie. It's quite clear at this moment who's better. White again moving pieces backwards. Fabiano correctly assesses this position is probably strategically winning. Now it may say 0.7 or less than 1 pawn, but strategically White's pieces have no future. There's no future for this bishop. There are no actual open files for the rooks, so he is desperate to avoid just getting smashed. And in this position, after king h1, Fabiano made a rather unfortunate decision in taking the rook. I kind of agree with FIDE senior trainer Jakob Ackard that knight is far superior to the bishop, far superior to the rook on e1. In a way, it shows a little bit of insecurity here. Let's just check what the alternatives were. Queen to d7, queen to e6, queen to f7, queen to g7, rook to h5. All suggestions by the computer other than capturing the rook, which is not worth the price of that knight. Everyone knows that the knight on the 6th rank is worth more than a rook, or can be worth more than a rook, or at least as much as a rook in a worst case scenario. And this was just an unprecedented, showing lack of confidence in his abilities to win the game strategically. I don't understand what Fabiano was thinking. This knight has choices all over the place. f5 is coming. The whole world is crashing down around White. Queen to e6, queen to d7. Was it rook to h5? Was that one of the choices? Yeah, rook h5 was one of the choices. Is better. Queen to g7, f7. I mean, when the computer is suggesting positionally correct moves and not grabbing material, you know that it's wrong. So knight takes the e1 was definitely an unfortunate move, but it did enable him to win the game in the fashion that he was accustomed to. So it's right around here that Fabiano realized that he's going to have to walk a little bit on eggs. Both of his rooks are not as good as they could be. In fact, I have a hard time believing that he ever managed to break through in this position. In fact, it's Prague who breaks through. Prague is the one who's pressing for something in this position, which is quite incredible. There is no reason for him necessarily to open up any lines for these pieces and to allow any opportunities. Obviously, his knight is stronger than the rooks, but still. Yeah, Prague is getting a little frisky here and trying for something. Obviously, Prague wants to make the most of this tournament, but by the time we reach the point where b5 is played, Black is again in the driver's seat, and there's hardly anything here. I actually was considering bishop takes c5 in this position without taking once on b5 and trying to keep all of his pawns in place. The bishop takes c5. Does it lead to play similar to the game? That is the question. Unfortunately, my original intention is a flawed one. But perhaps it is not, because I was actually considering the possibility of playing d4. But that's just ridiculous because the pawn is captured with check. So needless to say, bishop takes c5 is an option, but everything is better for Black regardless. It's unfortunate. The third best move. So he captures once. Obviously capture with either pawn is probably better. We can't let him have a passed pawn. We're going to try to barnacle on the a3 square and keep that pawn from being Now, personally, there were so many ways that Black could have probably eased his defensive, eased the defenses that White had but he chose to play on Frog's time trouble here. Frog was consuming a certain amount of time per move, and there's no doubt in our minds that this move was probably a little bit of a lemon. It might have been even easier for him, as Eric Hansen and Ari Atari pointed out, to play the immediate bishop to e1 check and not to allow anything funny to happen. But here, he throws in the intermezzo, bishop to b4 before playing bishop to e1 check. And then, of course, just simply guards his pawn against the move c3, and c3 was a little bit questionable. After all, there were opportunities here for white to start creating counterplay, giving his king some space, sacking a pawn back, possibly giving himself some options for the bishop. We don't even need to necessarily take this pawn, but we do have to watch out for sacrifices of the bishop with bishop to g3. In general, let's see what the line that they give is. Sacking back the exchange, possibly. Just in the nick of time. And this is still better for black. There's no way to stop this catastrophe in motion. Well, they say it's objectively equal. Wow. The g5 could have held the draw. So right around here in this particular position, if the rook had been on a3 in this position, would it have changed anything after rook takes c2? Probably not, because the rook is attacked the bishop on e1 anyway. So roughly this position could be level, but still, Fabiano has more time on the clock and is a more experienced player. Frog makes the rather fatal bishop to a1 move. He had to at least try to create some counterplay with rook to a1, which we thought was the only move in the fan zone. Bishop to a1, he's trying to cover across, but herein lies the tale, because when this pawn does take, it's almost impossible to stop this pawn from promoting in certain variations like the one we're about to see. The pin on the knight, the overworkedness of everything. And now Fabiano wins a piece by exchanging his rook for two minor pieces. And there was one more moment in this game where they thought that Frog could have played better for some drawing chances. And I think it was here with rook a4 instead of rook to a5. But obviously the computer assessment sees it very clearly, so it's hard to refute what's going on. The double question mark there, by the way, was unbelievable, right? Rook to b5 check had to be played, but it made life a little bit easier for white. And then the very, very simple, I'm winning your queen with queen a2 check. That one does have to go into my or I shouldn't say winning the queen, sorry. King to g7, and we could probably get a little bit more mileage out of this with bishop to e6. Or is it worse than we thought? Let's just check it out. What could have happened here? Yeah, it probably doesn't matter. We're still going to play bishop d6, bishop takes h2, and promote our pawn from a distance. And if we try for more in this banner, it's hard to say how this is important. But overall, a really amazing and good game from Fabiano, worthy of his stature in the chess world. But the general lesson is that you don't want to play the English opening as an up-and-coming rising star. You need to grab your opponent by whatever external any extremities that you can, whether you grab them on the shoulders, by the ears, whatever, and just wrestle your opponent to the ground. And the English opening, B3, closed and quiet openings like the Jobava London just don't do that against a much stronger player. The much stronger players are using the London and these quieter openings as a success story against weaker, less experienced players who are attempting to play these things because they see the strong players doing it to them, but it doesn't work that way. This is not a two-way street. Yes, you might get lucky. Yes, you may get into an endgame where you know what you're doing, but in general, calculation, tactics, and knowing the right endgame to choose to go into in order to convert your advantages, whether they be space advantages, material advantages, or just having more active pieces at the right time and in the right place. It really doesn't matter if you are the world's greatest expert on the London. If your rating is under 2,000 and you are playing someone greater than 2,000, I will believe that the greater than 2,000 player may be able to pip you at the post at any time, unfortunately. Even if the rating difference is less than 100 rating points. I think that basically you're fighting with your hands behind your back when you're playing slow positional openings against much stronger players. And Alireza and Kukesh played a much more exciting game, a lot sharper a game. I would think that E4 and E5 is fit for all audiences, unlike the London, unlike the Jobava London or the Tory attack and things like that. But here, in this particular instance, Kukesh just declines the Berlin with D3, and it just becomes a very old...
Quadraspassky said good morning guys and gals.
Good morning. How are you, Chris? It is another truly great day. So, in this particular position, what a strange combination of Bird's defense, classical defense, and Berlin defense we have here. Now, this normally is a good move, by the way, when white has a knight on c3. So I'm not entirely sure that it's not necessarily so useful here. But in general, Alireza handles this pretty well, holding the center, attempting to expand in the center. And ultimately, Kukesh has to decide the placement of his c1 bishop. And it looks like he is choosing to exchange, although there are some weaknesses involved, pawn weaknesses.
Sit.
That pawn on a3 is now a permanent weakness. Tired of it getting there. Alright, so meanwhile, yeah, I'm pretty tied up at the moment myself. So, this is a hard position to assess. Certainly, black has the advantage because of its space, but white has a really amazing outpost square coming up on d5 for the knight. Whether he can reach that outpost square is entirely a different story. And as it turns out, this move permanently weakens his f5 pawn, and that is, and what becomes and appears to be, the story of the game. Because starting right about now, in this position, All of black's pieces are tied down to this weakness, and I actually shared it in the Discord. A short video of all of the pros and cons of this is given by Grandmasters Eric Hansen and Aryan Tari. I don't necessarily know that I'm going to do a YouTube video on this, but I will consider it at some point in the near future, honestly. So, interestingly enough, vaguely I remember most of the analysis from this session. They repeat the position a couple of times until Mukesh says no draw. I mean, objectively the position is equal, but black is very passive, and in time pressure, Hikaru had already given the blueprint for how to beat Alireza 2 days earlier in round number 12. So there's no reason not to follow this blueprint to the fullest. Basically just putting your pieces on squares, pressuring the opponent, trying to keep a level game when it's needed. And I think the loss of the G-pawn was the final straw, honestly. Queen to G6 weakened that G-pawn immensely. There's just no way to defend it so easily. Let's just look at, I mean, he can try to move his knight, but in general he's going to lose the pawn on B6 as well. I'm sorry, with rook to B6 as well, so I just don't see it. Is there any move other than just giving the pawn? Like, this move is hard to believe, right? King to H7, rook to D7, king to H7, knight to D5, knight F6, also very tragic. Let's take a quick peek at this. So knight E8 is the first move. King H7, rook to B6, knight H5, rook B7 check. Yeah, these two pawns are just going to win, as they did in the game. It was a very exciting afternoon yesterday, Chris, here in Toronto. And no matter how good that knight looks, we're about to see what an illusion it is as Mukesh smoothly, I repeat, smoothly brings this point home. The amazing part was that Aryan Tari and Eric Hansen had already analyzed the probability that this pawn could not be promoted because of the mate threat on H7. So even if he attempted to jettison his rook, there's absolutely nothing here that can save him. Obviously, if we take the rook, pawn, queen to check, and there's plenty of counterplay, but in general, it's not happening. But that endgame itself is even lost because queen h4, rook h7, queen h7, knight h7, and then there's more than one passed pawn to worry about. So Alireza opted for the move to stop knight f6 first, and then there was a bit of dancing. I wasn't a huge fan of rook to e7 at first, honestly. I'm more of a big fan of just trying to get your material, or trying to consolidate your material with activating the king and preventing any counterplay. But fine, king e2 wasn't played. Computer believes that it's the best move. Let me turn that off. They repeated positions here a little bit, and then the next thing you know, the pawns start moving on the queen side, and they came up with the plan very briefly. There was one more moment of excitement here where it may look like a perpetual after king to g1, but we can probably escape it. The problem is that the knight might be dragged back by a e3. But in general, yeah, there's no perpetual here, because we can walk out. And even if you think that he's taking the knight, the pawn is still promoted. There's nothing stopping that pawn from promoting. So ultimately, the king did go to g3 and avoided the only other trick in the position, knight c2 checkmate. So Personally, this was a rather torturous game to watch, as Alireza could have gone through the motions, but in general, he chose to just hang it up and shake hands at this point. And single-handedly, in the last two tournaments, Alireza has handed the lead of the candidates tournament to three different players. In the previous year, he handed an indisputable lead. He didn't hand the lead, but he handed the whole tournament to Nepo by staying up all night long. Played bullet with Danya Naroditsky before his game when everybody needed him to win in order to make it competitive. If Alireza could have brought his A game to the board in Madrid in 2022, if he could have brought his A game and beaten Nepo, then the whole tournament outcome would have been very, very different. It would have been as exciting as this time around. But instead, Alireza stayed up all night long like a teenager would. Played bullet with Danya Naroditsky, who probably should have known better. He was there as one of the commentators for Cheese.com. And basically handed Nepo the tournament, as it turns out. It was very good. I hope Danya got a little gaffer from Nepo on that one, because there was no catching. It wasn't Danya's fault by any means. And Danya was just having fun, and Danya enjoys playing chess. And if you can play with one of the candidates to help him ease steam, get his mind off of a rather poor tournament. But on the other, the shoe on the other foot is that Alireza is playing in a very strong tournament, and he has to play the role of a spoiler for the other candidates. He cannot give up. And the only consolation prize is that he may get to share last place with Abasov. Maybe misery loves company, in this particular tournament. But in round 12, he did fight his hardest, but unfortunately wasn't able to prevail against Nakamura's sterling play. The same recipe happened then. Let's take a peek at Nakamura versus Firouzja there. Basically, this game, Nakamura ironically plays the French defense. Oh no, I'm sorry, Alireza. For a moment I was shocked to see the French on the board. But the French defense is not an opening that's somewhat reliable at the highest levels, but maybe, just maybe, he knows that Caro has some questionable choices against it. And if I knew that my opponent was going to play the exchange French, I think I would have to play the French defense every single time. I have said that before, and I'll say it again. If my opponent is going to play the exchange variation, I probably have to play the French as black every single time. So this game did turn out to be extremely exciting. And on the whole, it was better for white. That pawn on e2 was hanging on by a thread, keeping all of white's pieces tied down. Meanwhile, the activity looked pretty good for Alireza, but he just wasn't able to do anything with it. So he managed to swap out the bishop for the knight. There's a very cute trick here after rook to d3 that fortunately Nakamura has, because otherwise this counterplay by black would have been advantageous for him if Nakamura didn't already have an advantage in the game prior to going into this continuation. So, as it turns out, after rook takes d3, knight f4, the pawn on e2 is being threatened with extinction, and then Alireza starts to weaken his king position in a burst for activity. When you're a younger player playing against a more experienced player, you have to be very, very careful about weakening your pawn structure, changing the structure in a time trouble situation. It's not time trouble yet, I should say, but in general, you have to be very careful about weakening your structure. And now the knight gets to f5, where it's as strong as, or stronger than, a bishop. And then the knight gets to another square where he's able to exchange off black's only trump card. And in fact, he just chose to resign here. He did make time control right here. He played a whole series of moves in the first time control with less than, I thought it was worse than it actually is registering here on lead chess. I did, I thought it was much worse. So it's not, I apologize. But basically, this game was pretty straightforward. And he deservedly won this game in fine style. We have to just be very careful about how we retreat our knight. But basically, is there any way about this? Lyris just resigned as black. He didn't have any way of creating any counterplay. Two minor pieces versus a rook, c'est la vie.
Pegasus Sway. Said hi, was the flight to Toronto okay?
Oh, it was so smooth. There was a bit of turbulence going across Niagara Falls, perhaps. Certainly not the Appalachians. Those aren't real mountains. But there is some skiing in northern New York that I'm sure that we went over. But on average, Ali Reza has single-handedly given tournament leads to Nepo last year that was indomitable. There was no recovering from the lead that he gave Nepo last year. And this year he allowed Nakamura to tie with the leaders for first. Fabiano had to work his tuchus off to be there to a certain extent, but obviously Fabiano, a half a point back, managed to win yesterday to stay a half a point behind the leader, Gukesh. It was extremely exciting, Ron. Extremely exciting. I did post in the Discord photos that I took yesterday. I'm slowly putting them onto Instagram, as Instagram had banned me for a day, of course, right before the event. Very, very untimely, honestly. But I do need to get breakfast and do a few other things. But I am studying up a storm. This tournament has made me so hungry. Absolutely so hungry. I'm very impressed with Khan. I'm very impressed with Vaishali. Vaishali basically took out Lei Qingji, who's now, I believe, a point behind Tang Zhongji. So Tang Zhongji is getting a rematch for the World Chess Championship. We're not going to have a brand new World Chess Champion. Tang Zhongji is known as the 16th Women's World Chess Champion, and she will not be the 19th or 18th Women's World Chess Champion, because she lost the title to Yu Wenchun. I don't think she should get a brand new number. There will only be 17 world champions for the women, no matter what happens next. She may repeat in her current state, but actually I think Yu Wenchun knows Tang Zhongji very, very well, and this will be quite the battle. I'm looking forward to it. I will be doing some study streams on this. More study streams. We are catching up on Ron's when we get a chance. We're hoping to. We're going to plan on it. Every chance I get for a Purdy. Tiger, Purdy, I owe one more of my games. And I'm trying to recall if there was one other one. I've got it written down at home on my desk. Needless to say, the study streams are somewhat retired until I can catch up on Ron. He was throwing them at me fast and furious. But no, I'm going to probably limit them to World Champions, because those games are far, far better to choose from than Tiger. Tiger's games are difficult for me. My own games are not as difficult, but just as difficult to take pride in for the most part. So the leaderboard for the open section, we will end with that to a certain extent. Basically, if there are tie breaks in the women's section, it is because Lei Tingji wins today. Let's just check out the pairings for today. Round 14 in 5 hours. Lei Tingji is playing a Humpy Kotaru. Yes, she can do it, but Anna Mizuchuk has to deny a draw to the Chinese player, Tan Zhongji. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that Tan Zhongji is going to get her half point. And today, of course, in round 14, the tournament leaders are playing each other. The 4 tournament leaders are playing each other. Nepo and Caruana must slug it out. Fabiano must win the situation. Nepo gets a chance to show what he's made of, while I predict draws in these 2 games perhaps, but Alireza may wish to fight his way out of last place. While Gukesh, being a half a point ahead of Nakamura, has Armageddon odds. Basically, he has draw odds against Nakamura. If Gukesh wins or draws, Gukesh is leading or wins the tournament unless this game is decisive, and then there will be tie breaks tomorrow. I did book my flight appropriately to this trip in London 2018 prior to streaming. BS, I should just call it BS. Before streaming in 2018, I only booked my flight for the 2 last rounds, not thinking that I would need to be there on Monday. Me too. I booked the extra day on Monday. I'm away from my family. I don't really want to go to the Toronto Chess Pub. I am anxiously awaiting, looking at some really good quality chess here. So Prague, basically, I take it back. For whatever reason, I thought that Nishat and Perugia had the same score. I call these 2 players full point buy and half point buy. I just don't know which one is going to be which at any given moment. So in the first half of the tournament, we've played 13 rounds, 4.5 points, 3.5 points. As of yesterday, Nishat was batting 250. 25% of the points were coming his way. So that was not a good score at all. A buy would score better. I mean, I should say a half point buy would score better. But maybe not. So maybe Alireza Perugia will draw today versus Vadit to get this tournament over with. Maybe Alireza will draw today versus Vadit. Prague, of course, is going to take the socks off of Abasov, and as Gary Kasparov said, probably send him back to the tourist, make a tourist out of Abasov, as it turns out. Remember when, I'm trying to remember the name of the grandmaster whom he called a chess tourist. He's just visiting the elite sections for a little bit, looking around to see what it's like, and then he's going to go back to where he came from. That was probably one of the most arrogant things anyone could ever say while still being true. Is that crazy or what? He's just a chess tourist. He's visiting the elite sections, and he's going to go right back. And he was correct. Unfortunately, the grandmaster returned to the lower sections without much of a fight. Now, unfortunately, our community arena today, our community Swiss today ended rather quickly. I will add more tournaments, but basically the second official world correspondence champion, Laura Yakovleva, was definitely worthy. She's a lady GM. Apparently they call them lady GMs in the correspondence world. But it's quite crazy that she is a lady GM. And I was just looking for World Correspondence Chess Champions. And I have to make sure that I have all of these in the calendar. But basically all of the women are here. Cecil Purdy was the first official Correspondence World Chess Champion. Ludmilla was up there. She was also a, I thought she was also a women's world champion, but maybe not. Lady Grandmaster 1991. And it's a round robin held simultaneously with all of the other games. Rubtsova, Olga Rubtsova, I think she was the first one. That's what I vaguely remember. I believe that she was the first women's world chess champion. Let me just see if I can find the first one. Ludmilla Belovenets. She does have a, I assume that she has. This must be one of them. But I definitely noticed that they were, oh no, this is the very first. Oh, the fourth World Chess Correspondence Champion. That had to be Fabio Fittacaro. All right. There was a better one, I have to admit. Women's Soviet Champion, Soviet Championship. Hard to find the Lady Grandmaster title, I have to admit. But that's interesting that there's a Lady Grandmaster title here. Presidents of the ICCF. I think this is the page that has the Correspondence World Champions list. I apologize. This is not showing very properly in its entirety over there. But we will be back with more coverage. And I may do Instagram Live now that my Instagram is back. Please feel free to follow me on my socials. As well as subscribe on YouTube. I've not yet figured out the GoPro the GoPro streaming options, but I will figure it out today if I have the time, because today is the day that it needs to be done. Let's choose someone to raid, if at all possible.
Quadraspassky. Send audios.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much. What do you suggest? I know Quadraspassky's going to suggest James Blunder. Somebody can annoyingly sing him happy birthday. It would be even more or less annoying if it were actually his birthday. What do you think?
Pegasus Sway. Sent 5.
Really? Alright, so who are we going to raid? James Blunder. Always exciting, always on point. Just just for the presence of Quadrus Vasky. How about that? Thank you everyone for being here. We might be right back with the study stream. I have not yet decided, but I will be using the Candidates Tournament history book perhaps at some point in the near future, together with the Candidates by Alexander Kuzmin. Truly great book. Very interesting and very worthy. Dark Blade. Have a great day at uni. Ron, cheers and ciao. There is a new episode of the French Bishop Chess Cast out. Please check it out. Have a great day, everyone.